Welcome to Passages Pulse, where we track the heartbeat of Israel and the Middle East from a Christian perspective. In a time of confusion, division, and misinformation, we're here to help you cut through the noise with truth, clarity, and conviction. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Passages Pulse. It is May 7th. It is 2 p.m. Eastern Time. My name is Sebastian, and I'm going to be your host of this podcast with my colleague Josiah. Hey, Josiah, how are you?
Doing very well. Very excited to be with you, Sebastian.
Whoops, sorry, I got you to drink a little water. It's good to see you, Josiah. I'm so excited for this podcast. Just so you guys know, this podcast is going to be, we're going to bring guests in future episodes. But today we want to introduce ourselves. Most of the time, it's going to be Josiah and I talking about the most important issues of the day, of the week. But today, we would like to share a little bit about our personal backgrounds and why we started this podcast and what we're looking to forward to in this podcast. So let's do that. Are you ready, Josiah?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. The people want to get to know you. I'm going to ask you a question. Tell me, where do you grow up? Let's go back to the beginning. So we can start putting the pieces together of the man, the legend, the mystery, the resident scholar, Josiah. Where do you grow
Yeah,
up?
all the way back to the beginning, or just a brief bio. Let's go with maybe a brief bio.
Just tell where you call home. Where do you grow up?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. Grew up in the Midwest part of the United States. Go Chiefs! Huge Chiefs fan, and it was great. It was a great place for me to grow up. Really enjoyed that experience of being in the Bible Belt, growing up in a Christian home. The kind of parents that took us to church every week and spent a lot of time talking about the Bible and those sorts of things. And it was, I think, a pretty, ideal childhood for me, and really did shape a lot of who I am today. My early outlook on the world. So it was pretty fantastic. Nothing to complain about there. How about you, Sebastian?
That's great. We grew up in very similar places. Just kidding.
I know.
As you
Yeah.
can, as the audience can hear, I have an amazing, beautiful accent. I am from Colombia originally, not Columbia, Missouri, Colombia, South America. And I wonder if we grew up in similar areas as far as like farming community. I don't know if you grew up near farms. Did you?
I not necessarily. I mean, Kansas City, it's not a huge place, but it's, half a million people, so it is a major city. And I grew up not, I would say, in the farming or agricultural areas. It was more the suburbs.
Okay, because I did grow up. I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in the part of Colombia where your coffee comes from, farming community, and because of that, it was quite dangerous. So, where I grew up, there was a lot of like the mountains where I grew up. It's very important to control the pass to the Pacific, where
Mm.
unfortunately, that's where drugs get smuggled out of Colombia to Mexico. We're gonna get real right now, okay? So I just want to contextualize that the geography of the region where I grew up, it was very dangerous. It was very contested by the various groups. So that shaped a lot of how I grew up. But talking a little bit about family, I am one of three kids in my family. We were a unique thing as far as we were an evangelical family in a majority Catholic country and society, and our rest of our family. So my parents became Christians in college to the work of Campus Crusade in Colombia, and I was raised in a Christian home by my parents, and that was great. And then I came to America when I was 14. But before we keep going there, let me go back to you. Tell me a little bit more about your upbringing and how do you think that shaped your perspective of Israel and the Middle East? Because people listening to this, the way they're raised, it shapes how they see Israel. So how did it shape you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was pretty typical of a lot of people growing up in the Midwest. It's part of the Bible Belt, so you're in at least culturally Christian part of the United States. You're growing up in an area that is predominantly pro-Israel, pretty supportive of Israel. I would say one thing that was really interesting is that I probably, because I had a strong interest even as a young person in high school, especially in global affairs, maybe cared a little bit more about what was going on in places like the Middle East than a lot of my peers did. And this isn't, a knock on anyone, but I do think something that is often true of places like the Midwest is that there's just not a lot of context available about what's happening in the Middle East. So what most people know about Israel and the Middle East is going to be what you're going to find through mainstream media. Today, of course, social media is playing a much larger role than it did when I was growing up, but it's going to be very sensationalized headlines. And what you find is a lot of people who think that Israel is important, but they're not necessarily totally sure why that is the case. And they don't necessarily know a lot about Israel, even though they think that it is an important place and that the Middle East is also important. So it was a pretty interesting environment to grow up in that respect. And I honestly was one of those people who grew up thinking that the Middle East is important, especially because a lot of the current events that were going on during my early years. I grew up thinking that Israel was important because I grew up in a church that said so, and my parents said so. But it wasn't until later, really in college, that I started to put some of the pieces together, learn more about the history of Israel, and actually understand why it actually is significant. How
Yeah,
about
and
you,
I think
Sebastian? I'm guessing you probably had something a little bit similar if you grew up in an evangelical background. So I'm curious what your perspective was growing up in Colombia.
certainly, and I think what you described, your experience, I'm gonna guess a lot of our Passages alumni experience the same. For those of you who don't know, Passages is a Christian organization that takes college students to Israel. We've taken more than 12,000 people from more than like 600 universities in the past 10 years almost. So a lot of them probably grew up with the same perspective. So to me, I grew up in a church where Israel was a theological concept. It was, I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you, type of thing. And it was just, I never met a Jewish person, obviously, until I came to the United States. And it was, we didn't talk about the land, we didn't talk about the history, but our church was obsessed with traveling to Israel, even from Colombia. So people will save up a lot of money. They will sell empanadas for like 2 years to save up money to go to to go to Israel. And the church as a whole, like the network, will go to Israel twice a year. So people were very much um, incentivized, motivated to travel,
Yeah.
and eventually a lot of people did. So my mom did go to Israel in 2011. She was here already, and then my dad went as well. But so I grew up being told that Israel was perfect, Israel is amazing, Israel can do nothing wrong. It was a theological concept. Then I got to college, and I, I, uh, I changed my mind about Israel. But before I get there, I want to take a little step back because the question here right now is, how did my background shape? So I already said that where I grew up in Colombia, it was very dangerous. So here's what it
Hmm.
looked like. I lived in a little town up in the mountains where if you ever needed to get something important, you had to travel down to the main city. And when you travel down, there was always a military checkpoint. So I hope you start seeing some correlations here. That military checkpoint was always by the Colombian army, which, by the way, use Israeli rifles. Is the only country in the world that has been given a license by Israel to make the Galil, the rifle that Israel invented. And so I would come down, they would do checkpoints. They will make me, as a young boy, get out of the car. My dad and I, they never make the moms or the daughters get out, only the men. And they will search me. And so the first things that I started feeling in this military checkpoint was an Israeli rifle up against my back, checking me as a little boy for drugs or whatever. So then a lot of terrorism too. The terrorists would blow up the electrical grid, would take over towns. They would. I was raised being drilled on what to do if the terrorists came to town because they have done many times. In my lifetime, they never did. Just before I was born, they took over the town and everything. So, but I was raised like tensions are rising up. If the guerrillas come, here's what you do: you run away, you hide. So I grew up seeing a lot of violence, a lot of dead people. Even my classmates, I've seen four of my classmates being murdered by the gangs in town. So all of that terrorism, the fight against terrorism, shaped my worldview and how I would see Israel later, which we can get to in a second. But let's talk about your first trip to Israel. So you grew up in the Midwest, Christian family. Tell me about your first time. Where do you go to college, and what was your first trip like?
Yeah. So it sounds like both of us had our first trips in college, and I'm very
Yeah.
curious to hear. more because your background prior to your first trip was so different from mine. So it's we probably had very different perspectives going into it. My first trip was in college. I was at the time attending a school called Union University. It's a small private Christian university in Tennessee. It was a wonderful place to do my undergraduate work, and they had an opportunity for me to go on a trip. Actually, it was through Passages at the time, which was an amazing opportunity, and it really did have a just a tremendous impact on me because I entered Union as someone who, like I said, was already interested in global affairs. So it's not like I was coming in with zero interests to begin with, but I was still lacking a lot of context. So I started school as a student in international relations, and I had this vague interest in Middle East security issues, but didn't have a ton of focus yet. Knew that visiting Israel would be an amazing opportunity to learn more about the Middle East more generally, but also about this place that, again, I knew was important. I just wasn't totally clear on why it was so important. But that being said, it was an easy decision to go. So I signed up very quickly. I was excited to go, but I really could not have, I think, predicted just how impactful that first trip was going to be because I was still, a pretty young person. It was a very formative time in my life. I just finished my freshman year of college, and I went, and what I discovered is that it really had a profound impact on several parts of who I am. The way that I think, the things that I care about, even my future trajectory as a, scholar, as a career wise. It really changed a lot of things for me. So I let's give you a few examples. I discovered very quickly that what I had previously assumed were very abstract concepts, because again, I encountered them only through the lens of, a newspaper headline or a class that I was taking at school, were really not abstract, but very real, tangible issues that face people on a daily basis. So, the history of Israel, how it was created, the history of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, the history of Israel's role in the Middle East and the security challenges that it faced, all of these were not abstract ideas, but very real world issues. And it really hit home for me at some point during that first trip to Israel that it's easy for me to sort of disassociate from these issues or distance myself and think about them in this very abstract sense. But at the same time, this is a life or death problem for someone, and someone is really depending on the outcome of these issues. So that really changed the way that I thought about it in a lot of ways. I think it also changed what I cared about in a lot of ways because I, for the first time, began to really internalize, I think, some rich and foundational theological concepts, like the idea that I should care about my neighbor, that every human being is created in the image of God, and that as a Christian, that calls me to certain obligations to care about other people. Again, not just in a purely academic sense, because it's interesting to study this in the classroom, but because I should actually care about how these things impact other people. And that allowed me, I think, the opportunity to really invest in and begin forming relationships with people. I would say a lot of people, they visit Israel for the first time and they're obsessed with the place. And to some degree, that's true. I do find that it's a really powerful place, especially because there are so many holy sites. But for me, my attachment to the place was in large part driven by the relationships that I formed. I quickly formed attachments to people and meaningful relationships that are, still important today. I find the people of Israel and the Middle East more generally to be incredibly hospitable. They've always welcomed me with open arms. They've always been eager to share their stories and their lives with me, and to receive that in exchange. They've celebrated the birth of my children with me. They have celebrated wedding anniversaries with me. They've also been a place that I find where I can grieve the events of October 7, especially. I've deeply grieved the events of October 7 and the war that's followed with all the people that I've met there and formed real, meaningful relationships with. So, all of that really, I think, just had a super profound impact on me as a person. And then, like I said, did have some pretty interesting impacts on the path that followed for me. My career, I mean, it's the reason why I work at Passages. It's the reason why I spend so much time thinking about the issues of the Middle East, whether that's security or history or things like that. It's the reason why I went and got a master's degree from the University of London in global diplomacy in the Middle East and North Africa and studied Hamas for about 2 years, trying to figure out how this organization thinks and works. So I would say there's little to nothing of my life that has not been touched by that first trip to Israel and the impact that it had on virtually every aspect of who I am as a person and as a Christian.
Yeah, and tell us, what do you do now at Passages, real quick?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I'm the resident scholar at Passages, which is basically a fancy way of saying that I do all of our educational content and programming. So it's a privilege that I've been working at Passages for about 6 years now, and I get paid to think about a lot of really important issues, to research, write, and then think about how the Passages program reflects them and how we teach young Christians about these really big ideas and important issues, whether that's part of our experiences in person or online courses or podcasts like these. It's really kind of a dream job, honestly.
Yeah. So you're a resident scholar. When you graduated from that program, did they give you like a green card instead of a diploma? Because you're a resident.
No,
Psh, psh, psh.
no.
All right, that's the
Yeah,
first
I
joke of this
appreciate I
podcast,
appreciate the
folks.
attempt at a joke, but that's not how
Um,
that works.
that's the bar, and it's only gonna get lower from there. Okay. Well, that's great. And hey, shout out to Union University, great school, great people there. I got to take them on a spring break trip to DC with Passages last year. Great school. And also, if you're a Passages alum, let us know in the comments, what year do you go to Israel? What school you come from? And tell us the most impactful moment of your Israel trip. We'd love to hear that. We'll maybe read them here in future episodes. Tell us where you're coming from, Passages peeps. All right, let me tell you a little bit more about my first trip. Okay, so I grew up in this church. I'm gonna have to share a little bit of my testimony. I grew up in this church where we loved Israel. We also loved missions. So when I graduated high school here in the United States, by the way, I'm based in Georgia. That's where I'm in Georgia, in the United States. That's where I'm recording right now. Graduated high school, and I went on a mission trip, and a gap year mission trip to Puerto Rico. And I believe that's when the Lord saved me, and I truly became born again. And then after that, I followed a mission trip program in New Jersey for 2 more years. However, towards the end of that process, I started walking away from my faith. I think I just let my heart grow cold, my own sinfulness. And I believe the Lord saved me when I was 16 in high school, but I walked away from the faith for 3 years in college. And I hope some of our alumni can relate to that. That happens sometimes. Unfortunately, I wasted a lot of my time in
Mhm.
college, meaning just lived sinfully, just living for the world, for the flesh. And part of that is that I started hating Israel. I went to study political science in college, and when I was confronted by these difficult questions that we're gonna try to help our audience work through, I didn't know what to do with that, because I have only been told that Israel is perfect, Israel can do nothing wrong, Israel is a theological concept, and I didn't have tools to answer difficult questions about Israel. There was no passages when I was in college, so now there is. So I actually, because of that, I started growing bitter, walk away from the faith, and I became very anti-Israel. I became a leader of the anti-Israel movement at my university, and eventually became the student body president of the largest university in Georgia. And because of that, I got invited to go to Israel on a free trip to Israel, but it was only a political trip. And I went because I wanted to see the apartheid. I wanted to see the occupation. I wanted to see how evil this country is, so I could use that for politics. I wanted to take a bunch of selfies, be able to run for office later, and I went with those intentions. Remember, my mom had already been, my dad had already been, and I was so mad at them. I was like, how can you go there? Don't you know that they do this? How they oppress Palestinians, all these things. I went to Israel, and the Lord changed my heart. First of all, audience, I want to give you a fair warning. Throughout the episodes of this podcast, I'm going to bring up my experience a lot because it really marked me a lot. So I'm going, but right now, I'll just tell you that learning history changed me, changed my heart. I understood that Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, that they're indigenous to this land, and that they're the only people who are worshiping the same God in the same language, in the same place today as they did 4,000 years ago. Nobody else in the earth can claim that. Let me know in the comments. Same God, same language, same place, 4,000 years apart. Um, then the learning about the rules of engagement of the IDF really changed my mind on how they really try their best to limit civilian collateral. Of course, we'll get into that in our podcast. And also Israeli society, learning about how diverse that is not an apartheid, that is a blood libel and it's a lie. And that changed my mind. And then on the last day, I did one Christian touring in Jerusalem, and then spiritually, the Lord convicted me of my sinfulness, how I was living in rebellion. And when I came back from the trip, I started what the Bible will call making, bearing fruit in accordance with repentance. I went back to church, started leaving behind the sinful life, and thanks God, since then, I've been walking with the Lord. He's held me this whole time. And I'm now not living as I used to do in college, happily married with my wife, who I met in church when I came back. So Israel, of course, changed my life. After that, I started working for the organization that took me to Israel. I was doing campus work for them in the Midwest. Then I worked for the Israeli government, right? The former enemy. I worked for the evil empire of Israel for 3 years as marketing director, promoting travel to Israel for 3 years. And then I joined Passages in 2022. And right now, I serve as the vice president of advocacy and strategy. I lead our team that wants to engage alumni when they come back from the trip to give them leadership opportunities, and we'll discuss some of those. But yeah, that's how Israel shaped me, and I am so grateful for that. Obviously, big part of my life and my heart.
Mm.
So that's us. That's a lot about us. But before we move on to maybe some news of the day, some current events, you told us a lot about yourself, and we're going to continue to get to know you. Tell me one more fun fact about yourself, Josiah.
Ooh, one more fun fact. Another fun fact about me that is Israel related is that I actually met my wife on a trip to
Ooh.
Israel. So she's not Israeli, but she was part of a passages program that I was
Important clarification.
helping. Yeah, no, it is an important point of clarification. She's not Israeli. She grew up in the Carolinas in the United States, but we met as a part of a shared experience visiting Israel together, and it's cool. It's such an important part of our individual stories and personal lives. Then for that to be part of our collective story that we shared together, the story of our relationship is, I think that's pretty cool. So
That is great. It's sweet. What a blessing. I know a few people who to whom that's happened. A few people who met their partner, their husbands, their wives in Israel. So shout out to that. Come to Israel with passages. Maybe you'll find a husband. Maybe you'll find a wife. Can't make promises.
no
Um,
promises. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. My fun fact is not Israel related. I was an extra. My first job in high school, like out of high school for a little bit in the summer when I graduated, was an extra in a movie. Maybe I'll say I'm not gonna say the name right now, but it's kind of a known movie, and the protagonist of the movie is an Oscar-winning actress. So it was a lot of fun. I was an extra. I come out in the trailer. I come out in little pieces here and there. Of course, I had long, beautiful hair when I was in high school. Not anymore. So that's my fun fact that I am
Hmm.
a certified extra in a Hollywood movie. It was fun.
I'm gonna look you up on IMDb, see if I can figure this one out. You're being
I,
rather cryptic about it, so now I want to know what movie it was.
I'm gonna let the audience go hunt for that Easter egg. Go
Okay.
find the movie where Sebastian shows up.
Okay.
All right. let's talk about this podcast. So that's about us. Thank you so much, audience, for listening to that. Let's get to the meat. Let's talk about some interesting issues. What are we trying to address? What is the problem that we're trying to tackle in this podcast, Josiah?
I mean, there's a few things. I think I have a short list. I'm sure you have a short list as well of things that you want to prioritize. I think, unfortunately, if we're just talking about the discourse, obviously there is a lot of discourse about Israel. There's a lot of media about Israel and the Middle East. And so it's fair to ask the question, what's one more podcast? Why are we just adding to the very high volume of conversation that's happening right now? And I think the answer that I have, at least, is that unfortunately a lot of what I see happening in these conversations about Israel is very polarized. It's lacking in a lot of ways because you have people who are very black and white in terms of the way that they think about Israel and its right to exist, or the way that Israel behaves, or the role that it plays in the Middle East, the US Israel relationship. And you have people who are so entrenched on one side or the other of all of these various issues that, to be fair, are inherently controversial. People just have a very hard time having a constructive conversation. People are so entrenched that there's a very, to me at least, clear lack of nuance, of constructive conversation that requires critical thinking skills. And unfortunately, people just don't engage in those kinds of conversations very often. Most of what you're going to see is very short conversations that you can have over a social media reel, and people will take that and they'll repost it, and that's all they feel like they need to know. You know, I don't need to know anything else. I don't need to say anything else because everything that is important about the conflict can be said in 15 seconds. And that's just not true. I mean, it's just not true that you can simplify things to that degree, especially when, again, from my perspective, like this is people's real lives. I mean, these are
Yeah.
complicated issues that are life and death issues for some people. And it's a travesty when they're boiled down to a 15-second conversation that does not really wrestle with the complexity or reality of these issues. So to me, that's a huge problem. And I just would love to see us be able to contribute something to the space that is a positive addition, and that hopefully we'll be able to have some good conversations, to think critically about the issues, to consider different viewpoints. And that doesn't mean that we're going to agree with all of them, but that we will be able to explain why we believe certain things as opposed to just making blanket assumptions. And I think maybe to add one more thing that is pretty important right now, the discourse about Israel and the Jewish people and the Middle East and the US Israel relationship is quickly becoming pretty toxic, unfortunately, with a lot of unhelpful narratives being added to the conversation that, frankly, that they amount to conspiracy theories. Are engaging in either some form of revisionist history, or are propagating these conspiracy theories that are just not based in reality, but are very harmful because people find them so easy to believe. A lot of that, unfortunately, takes on some pretty sinister undertones, or not, maybe not even undertones, but overt overtones of anti-Semitism or things like that, hatred and discrimination of various kinds. And we just have to reject that, I think. A good quality conversation about what's going on in the world today has to be able to think critically about some of these, unfortunately, pretty hateful things that are being said, and try to dig a little bit deeper, do a little bit more work, think more critically to understand what's actually true, what's not, and then what kind of responsibility do we have if we do understand the truth. So those are the kinds of problems that I hope will solve, and reasons why I think this podcast needs to exist. Unfortunately, like, Christians need a resource that requires us or pushes us to think a little bit deeper, a little bit more carefully about what's going on in the world around us.
That's great. I retweet, re-X, all of that. Let me add. I just thought of something here. Like I took an Old Testament class, and my professor, who is a professor at Sanford, don't remember him right now, his name, but shout out to Sanford, another good partner of us. A lot of alumni for Sanford. That's in Alabama, just so you know. He in our class he brought a box, and it was God. The box was supposed to represent God, so we all could see different sides of it, but I couldn't see what the other person could see. So on one side it was like Lord, on the other side was King, on the other side was Creator or Redeemer. So the point is like when you look at theological issues, you should look at different parts of it. And I want to bring that
Yeah.
into here to the audience. When you think about Israel, a lot of people try to boil it down to one thing, like, oh, this is about uh, Esau and Jacob, or this is about land, this is about like whatever this is. And I think all of those things could be true for one issue at one point. But what I guess I can encourage the audience is when you boil it down to one side, keep in mind the other sides, keep like the other aspects, the other angles. But because Israel is, there are a lot of different angles to understand this
Yeah.
conflict, which, funny enough, I wonder if I'm about to contradict myself because when I thought about what is the problem, what am I trying to bring into the conversation, here's my theory right now, and I hope that you can help me out with this throughout our podcast, and the audience maybe will help me rethink and change my mind. Right now, here's my hot take. First hot take of the passages pulse.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't think this conflict is as complicated as some people make it seem. A lot of people make it seem like, oh, this is so complicated. I don't want to touch it. If you talk to a person who doesn't know a lot, they're like, oh, yeah, I just think it's really confusing. It's complicated. Yeah, I don't know. Or somebody will tell you at church, like, Sebastian, uh, kind of hard stuff will happen in Israel last week. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a hard thing. Like, I don't think it's that complicated. I think actually, if you look at it, this conflict is politicized, has been really politicized. And when you look at comparable conflicts around the world, right now, India and Pakistan are a big piece in the news. People don't care as much about other comparable issues of land, of religion, issues of countries that were founded after World War II. But people are obsessed about Israel and about the Palestinian conflict. So that's my hot take. I want to encourage the audience to think, if you stick with us, if you follow the resources that we'll give you, reading recommendations and stuff like that, I think soon enough you'll be able to grasp this conflict and understand it. And I don't think it's that complicated, although the solutions to it are quite are quite complex. So that's my hot take. Let me know what you think. Come at me, people. And then my second thing I want to bring up is I want us to approach these issues as Christians. Christian come to this thing with a Christian worldview, and that's the benefit that I hope this podcast will bring, friends. I know that the solution to every problem in Gen Z and millennials is start a podcast. And I know we're creating another podcast because we truly think that a Christian worldview would be beneficial to the conversation of Israel and the Palestinian conflict in the Middle East. Do you want
Yeah.
to say anything about my hot take, Josiah? Do you think I'm way off to say that this issue is not very complicated, actually?
It's this is a great example, I think, of a good conversation that you and I will have over the next several weeks. And I think it's good, to hear your perspective. It maybe is a little bit different than mine, and a lot of the conversations I have with people, I find myself wishing that they would allow for a little bit more complexity. But obviously, both of our experiences are true. I think what I would say is that while I think it is complicated, and there's nothing wrong with saying that it's complicated, I would agree with you that I don't think that's a reason to shy away from the conversation. Like, I don't want anyone who might feel, I don't want anyone to feel scared to engage in the conversation because it's complicated. And I know it can feel daunting, but the goal, of course, of the podcast is to acknowledge that sometimes it is complicated, but of course, we're going to try to make it as accessible and easy to understand as possible, just based on the types of things that we're studying as part of the work that we do, and hopefully that will allow space for people to join us as part of this conversation, whether they think it's simple, whether they think it's complicated. There's room for everyone here to hopefully learn something, and hopefully we'll all push each other to grow as a result of these conversations.
Great. Yeah. We'll embrace the complexity, folks. We are going to get into the weeds, and I'm so glad that we have Josiah, the resident scholar, to take us to that. So we'll have a lot of issues that we'll discuss. We're coming closer to the end of our episode, but the last section here today, friends, will be let's talk about some of the subjects that we'll be covering in the coming episodes.
Yep.
Today, I guess we can start talking about just a little update, a little briefing on the Israeli Palestinian conflict, especially the Israeli conflict against Hamas right now. And then also we'll talk a little bit about the US Israel relationship, what's happening right now. Actually, lots happening in the last few hours. But let's start there. Tell me about the war with Hamas right now. What's going on there?
Yeah, so if we're just giving you a sort of a sneak peek of the topics that we're going to be covering for the next several weeks, Sebastian, I think you did break it down into some important buckets, and obviously the first one is the war against Hamas post October 7. That's been a key part of the conversation that really, I mean, most of the world has been focused on. Some might argue disproportionately so, but it's hard to avoid this conversation because it's kind of just everywhere, whether it's on college campuses or it's in the news or it's on social media. It was even not the issue, but an issue in the election last year, the US elections in the fall of last year. So you can't really avoid it. So obviously, we're going to be discussing that. And if we're just looking at what's going on right now, I think there's a really interesting debate that's happening. It has been happening for a few months now since the end of the last ceasefire about what's next. Is there going to be another ceasefire? Is there going to be an intensification in the IDF's operation in the Gaza Strip? Because up until this point, what the IDF has mostly been doing is clearing different areas or trying to clear different areas of Hamas cells or terror infrastructure like tunnels or rocket launchers, that kind of thing. But they haven't been holding on to territory for long periods of a time. They sort of go in, they they clear an area and then they leave. And then what happens is that Hamas comes back, they recruit more troops, they sort of rearm themselves, and then you have to do the same fight all over again a few months later. Right now, it seems like there's a potential shift happening in the Israeli security establishment where there's a conversation about not just expanding the size of the buffer zone or the territory that they control on the border between Gaza and Israel, but potentially even recruiting tens of thousands of reservists to launch a very intensive ground operation where they take territory from Hamas and they don't give it back. And it's not entirely clear what that means to not give it back. Does that mean that Israel is going to reoccupy the Gaza Strip after they left it in 2005? Does that mean they're going to turn it over to the Palestinian Authority? Does that mean they're going to turn it over to some other coalition of Arab countries in the region or the United States? I mean, there's a lot of potential options on the table, but regardless, it seems like we're getting a little bit closer to a potential breaking point where Israel's going to have to choose between the two major objectives that were laid out at the beginning of the war, one being return the hostages, and the second being destroy Hamas. Up until this point, they've kind of been trying to pursue both, but haven't really been able to succeed at either one, at least not completely. And the question on the table right now is Israel getting to a point where it's going to make a choice between the two or not? And if it does make a choice, what decision tree does that then create where they have to choose between any number of potential paths forward, especially if they do reach a point where they have to come up with a day after plan for Gaza at the end of this war. So, a lot of really interesting things happening right now. And I think a lot for us to unpack in the next several weeks as we see what direction the war in Gaza will go.
Yeah. Quick follow up on this issue of how Israel has changed, or like Israel needs to had to change the way that they're fighting, right? Raiding, kind of clear out the area, moving on, then coming back to redo what they did a few weeks ago. A question for you: Israel changed their defense ministry. Yoav Gallant was replaced by Israel Katz.
Mhm.
Is the change in approach part of what the new Israel Minister of Defense has brought to the table, or is that just the Prime Minister of Israel's change in approach as well?
Maybe I think it's a little bit hard to say because I'm not sitting in the cabinet conversations, so I don't know exactly what he's contributing to this calculus right now. I would say I've seen more shifts after the chief of staff of the IDF was replaced than we did immediately after the Minister of Defense was replaced. So the civilian official responsible for, I mean, the equivalent of our US Secretary of Defense was replaced some time ago. And obviously, you would expect to see some changes in policy. And he has been maybe a little bit more hawkish on certain things than the previous defense minister was. But something else that also happened that's really interesting is that the military official or the top ranking IDF officer was also replaced recently. And it seems like he's maybe the one who has been rethinking military strategy in the Gaza Strip and potentially drawing up or trying to promote different plans than the previous staff did. So it's probably a combination of having a new defense minister and a new chief of staff. Eh, Regardless, I mean, there's been some change in leadership, and yeah, that has something to do with a different approach, probably to the war in Gaza, as well as, frankly, just the difficulty of making any progress in the negotiations. The longer negotiations stall with Hamas and you don't get any hostages back, the faster the calculus is going to change, and there's going to be a conversation about, okay, maybe do we need to rethink the way that we're putting military pressure on Hamas moving forward.
Yeah, and friends, we'll keep an eye on the coming weeks because the President of the United States, President Trump, will be visiting the region. He's not going to Israel, at least officially yet, but
Yeah.
things will happen, right? Conversations will take place. So I think it's a great time for us to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the Middle East as the president visits the region. Well, that's what's going on with the war. Would you like to talk a little bit about also just the region, Hezbollah, just the Houthis? What else is going on around the region in Israel's in a bad neighborhood, man. It's not a place where you want to go buy your house.
Yeah. Well, if we were having this
Great schools,
conversation,
though. Great schools. It's just a little dangerous, the neighborhood where Israel is.
it's interesting. It's yeah, yeah. It is interesting. I think if we were having this conversation last fall, then we'd be talking a lot more about Hezbollah. Obviously, it seems like the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel has quieted somewhat since there was a ceasefire also agreed to in southern Lebanon. So we'll keep an eye on that, and I'm sure we'll have some conversations about it over the next few weeks and months. But at the moment, the greater threats as it relates to Iran's proxy network are originating elsewhere. And really, the big topic right now is the Houthis in Yemen. It's a rebel group in Yemen of Shia background, shares a lot in common ideologically with Iran, has very close ties to Iran in terms of its funding and the weapons that it receives from Iran, and is essentially a proxy of the Islamic regime there. And it has been engaging in a lot of very aggressive action ever since October 7th, 2023. And what's interesting is that after Israel eliminated, not entirely, but a large portion of the threat that Hezbollah posed, the Houthis sort of took up the mantle. They'd been fighting Israel and really the international community since October 7 in various ways by either shooting at Israel or trying to implement a naval blockade of Israel by preventing international shipping from entering the Red Sea and the port of Eilat in southern Israel. That really intensified, though. Early this year, it began to intensify as Hezbollah weakened, and as we entered a ceasefire in southern Lebanon, the Houthis intensified their operations. The US also engaged in a massive bombing campaign to try to deter the Houthis. And the last week, there's been some really interesting developments that I think we're going to be tracking pretty closely moving forward. One, the Houthis managed to actually, slip a ballistic missile through not only Israeli but also U.S. anti-missile or air defense systems, and a ballistic missile from Yemen hit Israel's airport, Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. Thankfully, it didn't do a ton of damage. There were a few injuries, but no fatalities. Didn't hit any buildings, any planes, that kind of thing. But in response, Israel coordinated with the US, which had been asking Israel not to directly attack the Houthis because of the US campaign in Yemen. The US apparently gave Israel the thumbs up to go ahead and respond and attack the Houthis themselves because Israel did. There were 2 days of very serious airstrikes. The second day resulted in basically the destruction of an airport that the Houthis had been using in Yemen. So it was a pretty clear response by Israel. But what was fascinating, though, this was all happening on Tuesday of this week. A few hours later, President Trump announced that the Houthis in the US had entered into some sort of ceasefire agreement themselves, where the US is going to stop bombing the Houthis. The Houthis have basically given an indication that they're going to stop engaging in piracy or shooting at international ships. So the US gets something out of it because freedom of navigation and international trade. There's a promise by the Houthis that they're going to respect that moving forward, and in exchange, will stop bombing the Houthis. Israel, on the other hand, did not receive any promise that the Houthis would stop attacking them. So there's some really interesting questions on the table about what happens next. Are the Houthis done fighting? Are they going to keep fighting and just shoot at Israel and not at international ships, and then claim some sort of amnesty? Is the US going to continue to help Israel defend itself against the Houthis and the rest of the Iranian network? You have to also keep in mind there's the broader context of nuclear negotiations happening between the US and Iran right now, and President Trump's Middle East trip next week, where he's going to try to sign a bunch of trade agreements, more than likely with different Arab countries in the Gulf. So, just a lot of really complicated, messy stuff happening right now as it relates to what's happening, what Israel's role is in the middle of these situations, and how US foreign policy fits into the narrative, because there's so many things that the White House is trying to accomplish right now. Just a lot for us to keep an eye on and talk about over the next several weeks.
Yeah. What a time to be alive and to be starting a
What a
podcast
time.
about Israel and the region. I will say just a couple of things about that for the audience. Friends, I think the issue with Yemen, the United States have been bombing them and they still have the ability to fire missiles, even like Josiah just said, attack Israel. This shows the difficulty of trying to fight terror from the air only. Even Saudi Arabia tried to do this; they couldn't really get the job done, right? And Israel is doing that right now through the air. It's just the parallel here is Gaza. Like when the world hears that Israel is going to do another ground offensive into Gaza, the world, gets very worried about another round of aggression. But it's very difficult to defeat terrorists just from the air. You need to go in, as Josiah said. You can't just you need to go in and control the
Yeah.
ground and control the territory and hold it until the problem is solved, hopefully. So this is just parallels, right? We have terrorists in Yemen, terrorists in Gaza. You can't beat it from the air. You have to get in the ground. We'll see how that develops. Another thing I want to ask I wanted to reflect on the issue of the wider region. Like I remember last summer, I was truly like it was really dark period for Israel to be surrounded by rockets from Hezbollah, um, also rockets from the Houthis in Yemen. Iran attacked Israel twice with interballistic missiles, and it was like, is Israel going to survive? It felt to me like this is my 6 day war moment in my lifetime, but it's an
Mm.
incredible miracle where Israel stands right now. Hezbollah completely humiliated, decimated, decapitated in Lebanon, ceasefire with them. Israel has assassinated a lot of the Hamas leader, including Sinwar and Khanieh, and Iran has been also their defenses have been destroyed. So Israel is in a different region right now, and it's strong by God's grace. the Jewish people now are not in such a life and death like survival mode. Wouldn't you agree? Things have changed.
Yeah, I think opportunities and threats have both changed significantly in the last 6 months. There's a lot of negative headlines still, but there's also a lot of positives to consider, a lot of new opportunities that have been created. So there's, two sides to the story, obviously. We don't want to just focus on the negative because there are some positives, and we'll have a lot, I think, to unpack as we move forward, especially after the White House finishes their trip to the Middle East and we hear more about what sort of positive agreements that they're trying to reach that will expand opportunities for peace and trade and that sort of thing. There'll be, I think, a lot of really interesting things for us to discuss moving forward.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to say, as far as topics are coming up, let's keep the hostages in mind, friends. I encourage you all to continue to pray for the hostages. Continue to pray. Even now, we don't have clarity as how many of them are alive, and we'll tell you opportunities for the way that you can get involved to advocate for them and to pray for the hostages that they
Mhm.
might come home. Um, all right. Well, Josiah, I think this is a good start. We have a lot more to get to discuss in coming episodes. Shall we just finish off the episode telling people about maybe some opportunities that Passages has for them right now, and maybe they want to take advantage of that right now?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, I'll let you talk about DC because I heard we have a really cool conference coming up in Washington, DC. I want to tell them about an opportunity. If you're a college student and you're listening to this, or if you know a college student in your life, please, please, please consider a great opportunity that Passages has. It's called the Passages Campus Fellowship. This is a program that is a 1 year fellowship. You will get to go to Israel again in December of this year, but God willing. And it's only $500. Is the cheapest trip to Israel that you can get right now from Passages. $500, and you'll get a 10-day trip to Israel. It will be a different one. It will be a little more in depth. It will be focused on advocacy, of course, faith as well, and you will work with you to do 4 events in your university, and then you'll get a $2,000 stipend for doing that. So it's a 1 year fellowship. You get $2,000 stipend. You do 4 events to educate your campus community about Israel, about Jewish Christian relations, and you get to go to Israel. We'll be doing a training in August in Texas for this fellowship. So it's just a great leadership opportunity. You get to go to the training, you get to go to Israel, you get to do something for your campus to educate them, and you get a stipend for your hard work. So if you're interested in this, the applications close at the end of May. So we'll include the link in the notes for you guys to apply for that. If you know a college student in your life, please share it with them. But also, we have a conference, 2 conferences in Washington, D.C. this summer, actually. Josiah, tell us about it.
Yeah, well, the main conference that we are still recruiting for or have spots open for is our college DC program. Actually, the dates for that are July 31st through August 3rd. And it's an opportunity to come spend a few days with us in Washington, D.C. We have a great time at places like the Museum of the Bible and the U.S. Holocaust Museum, as well as hearing some great speakers. It's really a great opportunity to learn more about passages, what we're all about, and learn more about opportunities to get involved with us, to have some conversations about the biblical roots of the Christian faith, the importance of the Bible, and the role that it continues to play in shaping the way that we think about the world around us, opportunities to learn a little bit more about Israel and Jewish Christian relations and the importance of being friends of both Israel and the Jewish people. So it's a tremendous opportunity open to college students. And if you're interested, you can email trips@passagesisrael.org for more information. We'd love to hear from you and give you an application if you'd like to come.
Yeah, and yours truly will be hosting that weekend. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Visiting the Museum of the
Yep.
Bible is a must. It's a blessing that we have such a great museum in our country. You don't want to miss it. It's truly fantastic, and we'll have a lot of fun in DC. All right. Well, thank you, Josiah, for joining me today. Any last thoughts before we go?
Excited to do this. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for helping host and making this podcast a reality, and really looking forward to spending some more time with you talking about all the things.
Yeah, and thank you for the audience for giving us a chance for listening. Please, if you have any ideas for topics that you want us to cover, drop it in the comments. Let us know what you want to hear about. We'll try to make that happen. Thank you for our team, also in production, our passages team who's making this happen. Everybody involved, thank you so much. We pray that this will be helpful and uh, it will contribute for the edification of people's faith and understanding of Israel and the Middle East. So until next time, we'll see you. Thank you so much.